Hey guys, tonight, we're waking up in a scratchy bed of straw, tucked into the corner of a cold stone room, because apparently this is what passes for comfort in the 15th century. The chapel bells are already echoing through the valley, which means duty calls. And by duty, I mean hauling buckets of lime and trying not to choke on the dust before breakfast. You probably won't survive this life if you're fond of memory foam and oat milk lattes, but at least you'll leave behind some reasonably nice wall paintings. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The straw sticks to your tunic as you shuffle up, shoulders stiff, the air damp with the smell of limestone dust that clings to everything in this little chapel annex. Outside, the sky hasn't made up its mind yet, soft violet bleeding into pale gold, while the bells drag you into consciousness. Your breath fogs slightly, and you realize the walls hold the night's chill like a miser hoarding coins. That's medieval insulation for you. None. The bells are not exactly melodic. They clatter more than chime, a village blacksmith song ringing across the hills. It's said those bells were cast from scrap iron and leftover farm tools, which may explain why they sound like an anvil argument. Still, they serve their purpose, rousing every soul within earshot. Historians still argue whether rural chapels were more community hubs or mere satellite outposts of the parish. But to you, they're just the reason your day starts before dawn. You stretch, joints popping like damp firewood, and pull on your work shoes. Stiff leather, cracked at the seams, not quite waterproof. The floor is uneven stone, cold as if carved straight from the mountain's heart. You trudge outside, where chickens are already making their complaints known. Funny how roosters in paintings always look noble. Up close, they're all fluff and attitude. One even tries to peck your ankle as you pass. Medieval alarm clocks, feathered and rude. Your first task: check the plaster mix left to slake overnight. The bucket looks harmless, just a pale soup, but you know better. Fresh lime is corrosive. A careless splash can burn skin. Builders whispered that it was strong enough to dissolve bodies, though that was probably just scare talk for apprentices. Still, the sting in your hands after a day's work reminds you it's no bedtime lotion. You glance back at the chapel, a squat stone building crouched against the hillside. Its walls are plain, but the villagers dream of saints glowing across its interior. Fresco work, they believe, is a way to pull heaven down to earth, or at least to liven up Sunday. What they don't see is the grunt work behind the brush, grinding pigments, hauling buckets, and balancing on scaffolds that look like they were nailed together during a lunch break. As the bells fade, the village stirs. A shepherd pushes a flock across the road, their bells clinking in accidental harmony. You smell bread baking somewhere down the lane, and your stomach growls like a medieval dragon, though yours breathes hunger, not fire. You shrug and hoist the bucket. Breakfast will have to wait. By the time you reach the chapel door, your hands are already dusted white. The door creaks like it's telling secrets, opening onto cool shadows. Light sneaks in through narrow windows, strips of gold that fall across rough wooden benches. This space will soon bloom with color, but for now, it's just stone, dust, and potential. You set down the bucket, take a deep breath, and listen. The echo inside the chapel carries every shuffle, every sigh, as though the building itself is watching you, which is comforting or creepy, depending on how much sleep you've had. Either way, there's no turning back. The day of frescoes has begun. And speaking of beginnings, this is usually when I remind you. If you've been enjoying our quiet start in straw and bells, now's the perfect time to gently tap that like button and subscribe. Not for me, really. For your future self who will want more sleepy stories waiting when the night feels long. The bucket of lime waits for you, heavy as a grudge. And you know that before any brush too much splatter, you'll spend long minutes wrestling with it. The work begins not with paint, not with saints, but with mud, lime, water, and sand mixed into a paste thick enough to cling to stone walls, yet light enough for your tired arms to smear. You squat beside the barrel, grip the paddle, and stir. The sound is neither pleasant nor musical, a wet, sucking noise, punctuated by the occasional slosh that splatters your tunic. At least the stains make you look like you're doing something important. Medieval couture, stains as status symbols. You lean into the work, shoulders straining. The paddle resists like it has a personality of its own. Your fingers ache, but the smell, sharp, chalky, a bit sour, reminds you this is the heartbeat of fresco. Without the plaster, pigment is nothing. It has to be laid on the wall while damp, so the color seeps in, marrying plaster and picture forever. One mainstream fact to file away. The Italian word fresco means fresh, because the plaster must be wet when painted. The whole art form is basically a race against drying time. You sigh and keep stirring. Some villagers think frescoes are magical, colors that grow from stone. If only they knew it was mostly sweat, bruises, and buckets. The lime itself carries secrets. Builders slake it by letting limestone burn in kilns until it nearly screams apart, then drowning the powder in water to tame it. The mixture hisses and steams like an angry dragon, and when it calms, it rests in pits for months, or even years, before anyone dares use it. Historians still argue whether medieval craftsmen really let lime age that long, or if that's just Renaissance bragging recorded by proud masons who wanted their diaries to sound impressive. Either way, you're the one stirring the goo, not the guy writing the manual. The morning light sharpens through the chapel's narrow windows, and you haul the first bucket toward the scaffolding. Every step sloshes the mixture, splattering your shoes. The bucket's handle cuts into your palm. These aren't gym weights with padded grips. This is raw iron, unforgiving. You mutter under your breath, a sort of half prayer, half complaint. The saints painted here one day may get golden halos, but your contribution is calluses. Reaching the wall, you smear the plaster with a broad trowel, spreading it like too thick butter across the stone. The texture is gritty, reluctant, but after a few swipes, it smooths. You're aiming for evenness, but perfection isn't realistic. This is a rural chapel, not the Sistine ceiling. Yet you can't help glancing upward, imagining the future. Saints towering above, robes flowing, villagers kneeling in awe. For now, it's just you and your bucket. Sweat beads on your forehead. The air is already heavy. The chapel traps every breath, every grunt, and the lime dust tickles your nose. You sneeze into your sleeve. Better to smear lime dust on fabric than to risk it flying into your eyes. You know the horror stories. One unlucky flick of lime could blind a worker. Quirky fact for you. Some guilds supposedly gave apprentices protective veils of cloth, which they hated wearing because it made them look like gossiping widows. Whether that's true or just satire is another matter. Still, you imagine yourself as a veiled worker, coughing dramatically and chuckle. The trowel clinks as you scrape. Every patch of plaster laid down is a little clock ticking. By the time the wall dries, your chance is gone. Artists call each patch a giornata, meaning a day's work. How poetic. You secretly call it the enemy, because it dictates your every move. The plaster doesn't care if your brush slips, if your hand cramps, if your mind wanders. It dries when it dries. Fresco waits for no one. You pause, flexing your wrist, and glance at the tools lined up along a bench. The brushes are stiff, bristles cut from hog hair, tied to sticks of uneven length. They look more like instruments of punishment than art. Jars of pigments, still sealed for later, sit waiting like shy guests at a feast. You'll grind them later. Earth reds, soot blacks, maybe a rare touch of ultramarine if the patron was generous. But that's another battle. For now, plaster. Another bucket. Another smear. The rhythm settles into your body, hypnotic. You could almost fall asleep standing up, if not for the weight. The scaffolding creaks above, a constant reminder that soon you'll climb and spread plaster higher up, balancing between heaven and a hard fall. The villagers, if they wander in, will probably laugh at you wobbling. And honestly, you'd laugh too. Medieval slapstick. Man meets gravity, wall wins. Your stomach growls again. It's still too early for bread, but your body doesn't care. You think of onions, cheese, maybe a scrap of salted pork. Food in this place is always the same, predictable as bells. Yet you know the rhythms comfort people. Onion at noon, bread at dusk, bells at dawn. In a world without watches, food and sound are the clocks. A fly buzzes near your ear. You swipe at it, nearly dropping the trowel. Imagine explaining to the patron that a saint's halo has a fly-shaped smear because the artist lost a battle with an insect. You snort. Not the legacy anyone hopes for. At last, the wall before you glistens with fresh plaster, pale and damp. You step back, wiping your brow, surveying the day's first canvas. For a moment, you let yourself pretend. It's not mud, but marble. Not buckets, but treasure chests. You're not exhausted. You're a creator, shaping heaven onto stone. The moment lasts only until your knees complain again. Reality always wins. You lean against the scaffolding, catching your breath. Outside, the sun rises higher, gilding the fields. Villagers' voices drift in. Someone shouting about goats, another bargaining over eggs. The world keeps moving, indifferent to your labor. You exhale, shoulders sagging. The plaster glistens, waiting. You'll paint soon enough, but only if you can keep the surface alive long enough. Another sigh, another glance at the waiting buckets. You pick up the paddle once more. The work is endless, repetitive, but strangely soothing. Each stroke, each scoop, each smear is part of a rhythm older than you, older than your chapel, perhaps older than the hills themselves. Somewhere, centuries later, people might still see these walls and imagine beauty without knowing the ache behind it. You dip the paddle again. The lime swirls, clouds in water. Your hands are white with dust, and your sleeves are stiff. The bells are silent now, but their echo lingers in your chest. The day has only just begun, and already you feel its weight pressing forward. A long procession of buckets and plaster and breath. You smile faintly, tired, sarcastic, resigned. But isn't that what makes the history of sleep so perfectly boring? The plaster wall waits, smooth and damp, like a blank page daring you to mark it. Before colors come alive, you need pigments, little heaps of dirt, stone, and oddities from nature that alchemists once swore carried secret powers. You set out the grinding slab, a flat piece of stone worn shiny from years of circular motion. Beside it rests the muller, a rounded tool, heavy enough to double as a doorstop, designed for one purpose: crushing. The jars of raw pigment look innocent, but open them, and you're dealing with dust that sneaks into lungs and lingers in hair. Your morning already tasted of lime, so why not add minerals to the menu? You pour a pinch of red earth onto the slab, a humble pile that looks like rusty crumbs. With a little water, you start grinding. The muller rolls in circles, back and forth, until grit softens into smooth paste. The sound is a muted scrape, steady and patient. Your shoulders complain, but the sight is mesmerizing. Mud transforming into color. Mainstream fact for you: many of these pigments are still used in paints today. Ochres, siennas, and umbers, all dug straight from the earth, their names borrowed from the regions where they were first quarried. Of course, not all pigments are so ordinary. You eye a sealed pouch of blue tied with twine. That one's precious. Lapis lazuli, a stone mined in distant Afghanistan, rarer than gold in some markets. Patrons sometimes demanded the Virgin Mary's robes painted in this shade, as if heaven itself required a wardrobe of imported stone. Grinding it is painstaking, each fleck of blue like a grain of treasure. Scholars still argue whether artists stretched the pigment with cheaper substitutes, azurite, smalt, or even indigo, when money ran short. If you had to bet, you'd say yes. Who wouldn't try a shortcut when the patron wasn't looking? Dust rises as you grind, sneaking up your nose. You sneeze, spraying droplets perilously close to the expensive pigment. Achoo, may the saints forgive me, you mutter, wiping your sleeve. Quirky tidbit: some workshops kept apprentices outside during grinding sessions, fearing not only sneezes, but also theft. Powdered lapis was so valuable that a handful could be worth a year's wages. You wonder what would stop a clever boy from tucking some into his hair and shaking it out later. Probably nothing but guilt, or a sharp-eyed master. The chapel is quiet but not silent. Outside, chickens scold each other, and the faint thud of an axe carries from somewhere in the village. Inside, only your scraping and occasional sighs fill the air. You lean harder, grinding the pigment into a butter-smooth slurry, then scrape it into a small dish. Each dish lines up neatly, a row of future saints waiting in powdered form. Next comes black, the simplest, but most stubborn. This one isn't mined, but made. Lamp black, scraped from soot left in oil lamps. It coats fingers like tar, refusing to wash off. You smear some across the slab, add a drizzle of water, and begin the same circular grind. The paste turns glossy, like liquid shadow. Every saint needs outlines, after all, and every halo requires contrast. Funny, isn't it? Holiness framed by soot. You pause to stretch, wrists aching. Grinding pigments is not glamorous. It's repetitive, mind-numbing, and essential. Without smooth colors, frescoes crumble into patchy stains. Patrons expect miracles on walls, not mud. You glance up at the bare plaster, feeling the weight of expectation. Villagers will shuffle in on Sunday, squinting at the first figures. They'll point, gossip, judge. You chuckle. Imagine their faces if they knew how many times the Virgin's robe might be patched with blue of questionable origin. The jars fill slowly. Reds, yellows, blacks, a pinch of green from malachite. Each carries a story. Malachite, ground too roughly, loses its brightness. Reds can fade if the lime bites too strong. Yellows sometimes turn brown, betraying their sunny promise. You recall a rumor that some painters mixed pigments with egg yolk, others with casein from milk, still others with beer froth. Historians still argue whether those additives were clever chemistry or just desperate improvisation. You prefer the image of a monk sipping ale, then spilling foam into the paint and calling it innovation. Your hands are chalky again, the skin between your fingers cracked from lime and dust. You lick your lips, taste grit, and cough. The thought strikes you. Modern painters complain about fumes, but medieval ones lived in a haze of smoke, lime, and minerals without even a concept of health hazards. You snicker softly. If OSHA ever time-traveled here, they'd faint before noon. The chapel door creaks open, startling you. A child peeks in, wide-eyed, curious about the little dishes of color. You wave them closer, then show the grinding slab. The child giggles as you smear a dab of red on the stone, dragging it into a line. Their finger twitches, ready to poke, and you quickly shake your head. Some boundaries, even in sleepy villages, are absolute. Pigments are sacred, or at least expensive. The child runs off, barefoot slaps fading outside, leaving you alone again with your rainbow of mud. You resume grinding, the rhythm lulling. Scrape, circle, scrape. A fly lands on the malachite, buzzing happily in its green pool. You wave it away, muttering, "Not for you." Imagine explaining to the patron that the Archangel Michael has a fly fossilized in his robe. Fresco history, rewritten by insects. You laugh softly at the thought, the sound bouncing against stone walls. By late morning, the table looks more like an apothecary's shelf than an artist's station. Dishes of color shimmer faintly in the light. Crimson puddles, ochre smears, soot-black pools. Together they promise a vision far brighter than this dim chapel. You rub your eyes, realizing how much dust has settled into your lashes. Every blink feels like sandpaper. You whisper a quiet complaint to the saints. If divine light looks anything like this, I'd prefer a nap. But nap time isn't an option. You still need to prepare the brushes, check the scaffold, and line up sketches. For now, though, the pigments are ground. The air is heavy with their scents, and your arms tremble with fatigue. You step back, surveying your work. The wall still waits, pale and patient, but at least you've armed yourself with colors. You scoop the tools aside, wipe your hands on your tunic, and stretch until your back cracks. Outside, the bells strike again, announcing the passage of time. Noon feels far away, yet already you're spent. This is the part no one remembers. The sweat before the saints, the grind before the glory. You glance once more at the lapis pouch, still unopened. Its weight promises beauty, but also trouble. Will the patron pay for it? Will you be accused of stretching it too thin? Historians still argue whether artists willingly diluted such pigments or were forced by stingy sponsors. You sigh. Some debates never end, just like grinding. For now, though, you have dishes of color, a damp wall, and the sound of bells fading into quiet. The fresco journey stretches on, and you trudge forward, hands aching, eyes gritty, but with a faint smile. After all, isn't boredom the truest companion of history? The plastered wall gleams faintly, damp and ready, but you know better than to dive straight in with brushes. Every figure begins as a shadow, and every shadow as a line. You fetch a roll of rough parchment, its edges curled and blotched with grease stains from too many journeys stuffed in saddlebags. This is your cartoon, the draft drawing, Not the Saturday morning kind with wisecracking animals, but the medieval tool for plotting saints and scrolls. You unroll it across a wooden bench, weighing the corners with stones so it doesn't curl back like an unruly pet. Charcoal sticks wait nearby, stubby black soldiers already smudging your fingertips. The smell of them is faintly smoky, like a hearth long cooled. You lean in, sketching the arch of a shoulder, the sweep of a robe. Lines scratch against parchment, hesitant at first, then bolder as your hand remembers the rhythm. It is not about perfection. This is a guide, a map for the wall, soon to be pricked with tiny holes and dusted with soot to transfer outlines. One mainstream fact: this technique, called pouncing, allowed artists to copy images across surfaces, a medieval projector in its way. Without it, consistency would be impossible. The cartoon's figures slowly emerge, a saint raising a hand, eyes solemn, feet awkwardly flat. You pause, tilt your head, smirk. No matter how carefully you draft, hands always look like stiff claws. Some say the trick is to study your own hand, but then you risk smudging charcoal everywhere. Historians still argue whether workshops trained apprentices on anatomy, or if they just repeated formulas copied from older masters. Judging by your own crooked sketch, you're voting for the formula theory. A sneeze bursts from you suddenly, charcoal dust puffing into the air. You curse softly, now staring at an unintentional storm cloud across the saint's robe. Quirky tidbit: some artists supposedly mixed their charcoal with wine, claiming it made smoother lines and less dust. You imagine explaining to your patron that the Virgin's outline comes courtesy of last year's vineyard. Would they mind? Perhaps not. Wine solves many medieval complaints. You continue, sketching halos, scroll banners, tiny architectural flourishes. The parchment grows crowded, black lines crisscrossing until you have to squint to make sense of them. You rub your chin, leaving a streak of charcoal that makes you look more chimney sweep than artist. The draft isn't elegant, but it's enough. Later, when pressed against plaster and dusted with soot, it will whisper its outline onto the wall, a ghost ready for color. The chapel door groans again, and this time it's not a curious child, but the mason, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. He mutters something about your lines not matching the curve of the arch. You sigh, roll your shoulders, and gesture broadly. Yes, you'll adjust. Yes, it's fine. The eternal feud between stone and brush. You grumble inwardly, imagining a world where artists and masons swapped jobs for a day. Imagine the crooked walls, the hilariously overbuilt halos. Still, you nod politely. No need to start an argument before noon. Back to the parchment. You fetch a pin, pricking tiny holes along the charcoal lines. Dot by dot, saint by saint. The process is slow, almost meditative. Each prick leaves a whisper of daylight through parchment. Your fingers grow sore, but eventually the figures are dotted like constellations. Roll it up again, tie it with string, and it's ready to press against the plaster. Later, soot dust rubbed through the holes will mark the wall with the same constellation, ready to guide your hand. You pause, stretch, and glance upward. Sunlight drifts through the narrow windows, casting golden stripes across the scaffold. Dust motes drift lazily, glowing like tiny halos of their own. For a fleeting moment, you think about how countless hands over centuries must have repeated these motions. Sketching, pricking, dusting. Fresco isn't genius so much as ritual. You follow steps older than you, older than the chapel, maybe older than memory itself. Your stomach interrupts with a growl, loud enough to echo. You laugh quietly, pressing a hand to it. Saints may survive on prayers, but you still need bread. Still, work first. Bread later. You crouch to retrieve another scrap of parchment, sketching a trial pattern for the border, leaves twining into knots, tiny flowers sprouting in impossible symmetry. These flourishes are more fun. A chance to sneak in whimsy while patrons imagine solemnity. A vine here, a curling leaf there, perhaps even a lopsided bird, if you're feeling mischievous. After all, historians still argue whether those little creatures in medieval borders were symbolic or just doodles born from boredom. Personally, you're leaning toward boredom. Charcoal smudges stain your palms, black crescents beneath your nails. You wipe them on your tunic, which now looks more like a butcher's apron than an artist's garment. Every craftsman you know carries such badges. The mason's dust, the smith's burns, your own smudges. Medieval laundry never stood a chance. A cough echoes from outside. The mason again, no doubt. And you resist the urge to roll your eyes. You finish the last flourish, tuck the parchment under your arm, and step back toward the wall. The plaster glistens, waiting for its ghostly guide. You press the parchment carefully, hands smoothing wrinkles, aligning curves with stone. With a pouch of soot, you pat along the holes, leaving faint dots across the surface. Pulling back, you see it. Faint, but visible. Saints and scrolls now hovering like pale spirits across the wall. You exhale, long and slow. It isn't art yet, but it's a promise. The chapel no longer feels empty. It hums faintly with potential. You wipe sweat from your brow, streaking soot and charcoal into an abstract mask. A glance at your reflection in a bucket confirms it. You look more outlaw than artist. You chuckle softly. If villagers walk in now, they'll think a bandit has invaded their holy place. Outside, the bells toll again, closer to noon. The rhythm of the day marches on, buckets waiting, pigments ground, outlines faint. You lean against the scaffold, back aching, but your lips curl in a half smile. The saints are here now, hidden in dots, waiting to be born. And though your stomach protests, your heart beats a little lighter. The next step will demand climbing, balancing on beams that creak like old knees, stretching your arm until it cramps. But for now, you savor this moment. Lines on plaster, whispers of figures, the quiet satisfaction of preparation. Every fresco begins with a cartoon, and every cartoon begins with messy hands, a sore back, and the quiet scratch of charcoal against parchment. The wall breathes softly in the cool air, waiting. You gather your tools, tie up the parchment, and glance once more at the faint outlines, shimmering like constellations on stone. The day presses forward, and so must you. The outlines cling faintly to the plaster, a constellation of soot and charcoal dots waiting for breath and color. You glance at them, then glance upward, and groan quietly. The scaffolding waits like a half-friendly, half-threatening beast, all crooked beams and ropes that creak in protest. If saints demand to live high on the wall, you must follow. Your knees, however, file a polite objection. You test the first rung of the ladder, its wood rough, splinters snagging your palm. The scaffold creaks with the weight of your foot. One step, then another. The boards flex, moaning softly. You mutter encouragement to yourself, as if you're taming a stubborn donkey. The view shifts as you climb, floor shrinking, ceiling looming, the wall stretching out like an enormous pale canvas. By the time you reach the top plank, Your stomach has reminded you it doesn't like heights either. The plank beneath your feet is uneven, a little warped. You crouch to test its sway, and it shudders like it's sharing a joke at your expense. Quirky tidbit for you: medieval scaffolds were rarely nailed tight, built instead from poles lashed with rope so they could be dismantled and reused. A thrifty solution, yes, but also a recipe for acrobatics. You find yourself balancing like a reluctant performer in a circus centuries too early. Your brush, freshly rinsed in water, drips faintly onto your hand. The bristles feel stiff but ready, hog hair bound to a stick by thread and wax. You test it against the plaster, dragging a thin line of water. The plaster drinks greedily, darkening where the brush passed. The surface is alive, thirsty, demanding. You whisper to it, half sarcasm, half prayer. Stay wet long enough, and maybe we'll both look like geniuses. A memory flickers. You once watched an older master leap onto scaffolding as though he had wings, never glancing down, swinging brushes in grand arcs that became saints in hours. You wonder if he was born fearless, or if he simply learned to ignore the possibility of a 30-foot drop. Historians still argue whether artists worked alone or in teams of apprentices on scaffolds like this. Judging by the ache in your calves, you vote for teams. If not, the saints owe their halos to sheer stubbornness. From your perch, the chapel shifts in perspective. You see dust dancing in light beams, villagers crossing the fields, even the faint blue of distant hills. The world looks almost manageable from here, until a breeze sneaks through the cracked window and wobbles the scaffolding. You freeze, breath caught. For a heartbeat, you are less artist and more sack of flour at risk of spilling. You mutter another prayer, promising to avoid jokes about donkeys if the planks hold. Your hand steadies on the brush. The soot dots on plaster guide you, faint stars forming figures. You trace the first outline. Red ochre diluted into watery pigment, flowing along dots like a constellation turned into a figure. A halo begins its circle, shaky at first, then smoother. Your wrist steadies, and soon a robed arm extends. It's clumsy, yes, but recognizable. Saints must begin somewhere, even with wobbly knees. Sweat rolls down your temple. You wipe it away with the back of your sleeve, leaving a smear of red ochre that now makes you look like you've lost a duel with a beetroot. You sigh, but the humor lightens the fear. You whisper, "The saint approves. He wanted a martyr's mark anyway." That earns a chuckle from yourself, echoing faintly off stone. 3 jokes before noon. You're on schedule. You dip the brush again, the pigment pooling in bristles, and continue tracing. Slowly the outlines bloom. Hands, robes, the faint curl of a scroll. It is still faint, ghostly, but it exists. Below, the buckets wait, the grinding slab still smudged. Up here, though, is quiet concentration, broken only by creaks of wood and your own muttered commentary. You are balanced between heaven and floor, between pigment and plaster, between patience and gravity. Another mainstream fact floats into your mind. Many chapels like this were painted not just for beauty, but for instruction. Villagers who could not read would read the walls, learning their saints and stories through painted images. Your brushstroke, shaky though it feels, might become someone's gospel someday. That thought steadies you more than the rope lashings beneath your feet. A fly buzzes near your ear again. This one seems determined to test your balance. You swat half-heartedly, nearly tipping the jar of pigment. You growl softly. "If you knock me off, I'm painting your face on the devil just out of spite." The fly departs, leaving you to your solemn threats. Below, footsteps echo. The mason again, muttering about cracks near the apse. You bite your tongue. From up here, the cracks look small enough. Nothing that a layer of plaster won't disguise. You know better than to argue. Masons always win stone debates. Instead, you hum softly, letting the tune settle nerves. The acoustics of the chapel throw your voice back to you, strange and hollow, like a duet with a ghost. The outlines grow more confident. A robe flows from shoulder to ankle, folds implied in simple lines. You smirk. Clothing, at least, is forgiving. No villager will count pleats. Faces, however, will betray you. You sketch an oval for the head, charcoal dots guiding your brush. It looks more like a potato at this stage, but you reassure yourself. It's only the underdrawing. Potatoes become saints with patience. Your knees ache, your feet shift, and you realize hours have passed. Sunlight has drifted higher, beams sliding across the floor like slow dancers. Dust floats, golden and lazy. Your stomach growls again, reminding you bread waits somewhere in the village. But you refuse to climb down yet. Not until the first figure feels real. Finally, you step back as far as the plank allows. The figure looms faintly on plaster, ghostly yet undeniable. A halo arcs, a robe drapes, a hand raises in blessing. You exhale, shoulders sagging. It is imperfect, wobbly, slightly potato-faced, but it is there, and with it comes relief. You sink onto the plank, legs dangling slightly, brush still in hand. The chapel stretches silent around you, its walls no longer blank. Below, the plaster waits for more. Above, the ceiling arches like a reminder of how far you still must climb. But for now, you rest. Soot and ochre staining your hands, sweat streaking your brow, a faint smile tugging at your lips. The scaffold creaks again, reminding you who holds your fate. You pat the plank like an old friend. Just one more day, all right? Don't betray me now. The wood says nothing, but it holds. For now, that is enough. The ghostly outlines cling to plaster, faint promises of figures waiting to be filled. But today, the brush meets pigment in earnest. You steady yourself on the scaffold, dipping the stiff bristles into the dish of ochre, diluted to a thin wash. The bristles split slightly, leaving trails of golden brown across the damp wall. The plaster drinks greedily, darkening as if swallowing sunlight itself. Your first strokes are tentative. An arm, the sweep of a robe, the faint beginning of a halo. The pigment seeps into the plaster, fusing instantly. There is no erasing here, no second chances. Fresco is merciless. Once the color sets, it becomes part of the wall's skin. Mainstream fact to file away. This permanence is why frescoes survive centuries, colors embedded in the very chemistry of stone. Each stroke you make is a contract with time. You adjust your grip, steadying your wrist against the wall. The surface feels cool under your knuckles, the plaster damp, the resistance faint but constant. You exhale slowly, focusing on the curve of a line. Every breath feels like a gamble. A slip too fast, and the saint gains an accidental mustache. You smirk. Maybe holiness does require facial hair. Joke number 1, delivered to yourself, echoing back in faint chapel acoustics. The robe grows broader, ochre flowing like sunlight through stone. You dip again, adding shading with sienna, darkening folds where shadows might fall. The pigments blend softly, not dramatic, but subtle enough to trick an eye from the village bench. These people won't study brushwork. They'll see robes, hands, halos, and maybe feel a nudge toward reverence. That is the point. Not perfection, but persuasion. A drip slides from your brush, streaking down the plaster in a crooked line. You curse softly, then smear it into shadow with a quick flick. Now it looks intentional, a fold of fabric. You chuckle at your own improvisation. Quirky tidbit. Some fresco masters supposedly kept little stories ready for mistakes. If a blotch appeared, they'd claim it symbolized divine mystery, not human error. You shake your head. If only excuses turned into wages. The air grows warmer. Light angles through narrow windows, beams cutting across dust motes. Your hands sweat, the brush slippery. You pause, wiping your palm against your tunic, which has already given up on cleanliness. You sigh and return, shading the saint's arm, filling the robe. Bit by bit, the figure deepens. Faces come next. You hesitate, brush hovering. A wrong line here ruins everything. You trace lightly with diluted black, outlining an oval. Then, eyes. Just dots at first, then arches above them. The mouth, a faint curve. Suddenly, the saint looks back at you, lopsided, but alive. A shiver runs down your spine. It is unnerving, staring into something you know you just created. Historians still argue whether medieval artists meant for figures to look so solemn, or whether stiff technique simply produced those expressions. Either way, solemnity works. You lean closer, whispering, "Sorry about the nose," as your brush makes it slightly crooked. Joke number 2, whispered confession. The saint says nothing, of course, but you imagine his patience, a forgiving silence. Below, faint noises carry. Villagers shuffle outside, goats bleating, someone calling for a child. The world continues while you wrestle with color. You pause to breathe, brush poised, listening to echoes. The chapel absorbs every sound, amplifying your little coughs into ghostly whispers. Your next color is red earth, ground into a paste, now watered into soft wash. You dip carefully, paint the inner lining of the robe. The contrast sharpens the figure, robe flowing in warm harmony of ochre and rust. Slowly, a saint emerges. Not perfect, not smooth, but unmistakable. You lean back, letting your tired eyes blur. Even from this scaffold, the wall glows faintly. A breeze sneaks in again, shivering the scaffold. You grip the plank, muttering threats. Joke number 3 arrives. "If I fall, please make sure I land in the stew pot. At least someone will get a meal out of this." The empty air doesn't laugh, but you chuckle at your own gallows humor. Your brush hand trembles. You set it down, flexing fingers. The joints ache, stained black and red, nails clogged with grit. You dip the brush in clean water, rinse it until the bristles fan pale. Pigments swirl in the jar, tiny clouds drifting. You wipe sweat from your brow. Another mainstream fact surfaces. Fresco requires working in giornate, small daily sections of plaster. Today's patch must be finished before drying. Tomorrow, another section, another figure. Each day is a fragment of a whole, stitched together in layers of plaster and paint. The wall becomes a diary of exhaustion. You return to work, adding highlights with white lime wash, brightening the curve of the robe, the arch of a halo. The wall seems to breathe under your hand, absorbing, fixing, preserving. Every line you make is one step closer to a chapel that sings in color. At last, you step back, knees trembling. The saint's figure stands, robe glowing in warm hues, halo faint but present. It's rough, not polished, but alive enough to matter. The villagers will squint, nod, maybe even cross themselves. That's enough. You set the brush aside, sit heavily on the plank. Your chest rises and falls with relief. The fresco has begun, truly begun. Not just outlines or cartoons, but color breathing on stone. The chapel feels different now, fuller, as though someone else has entered and joined you. The day is far from over. Buckets still wait. Pigments still line the bench. Scaffolding still sways. But for this moment, you allow yourself to rest. Hands stained, knees aching, heart oddly light. The saint looks back, patient, imperfect, but present. You nod at him, muttering, "We'll get there, together." The saint's robe glimmers faintly in the dim chapel light, its ochre folds still damp. You step back on the creaking scaffold, wiping sweat from your brow, and glance toward the doorway. Movement catches your eye. A pair of villagers wander in, hushed voices echoing too loudly in the stone chamber. They pause, stare up at the faint figure blooming on the wall, and murmur something you can't quite catch. You try to ignore them, focusing on dipping your brush into another dish of pigment. Yet their presence clings to the air, a reminder that fresco painting is never truly private. Villagers drift in and out like curious cats, drawn by the smell of lime, the creak of wood, and the promise of saints slowly surfacing from stone. For them, this is a marvel. For you, it's Tuesday. One woman clutches her shawl tighter and whispers, "His eyes follow you." You almost laugh. Of course they do. 2 dots of charcoal always seem alive if you stare long enough. Quirky tidbit. Medieval villagers often believed unfinished figures already held spiritual power, as if the act of drawing summoned presence before completion. You wonder what they would think if they knew you smudged those eyes by accident. You keep painting, brush sliding against plaster. Red earth spreads into shadow. Black outlines sharpen edges. You whisper encouragement to yourself, as much as to the saint. The villagers shuffle behind you, footsteps scuffing stone, their whispers growing. You feel their eyes on your back, judgment or awe, or both. Historians still argue whether villagers saw painters as craftsmen or something closer to magicians, coaxing spirits from walls. If only they knew how unmagical the work feels, perched on wobbly boards, sweating through linen. A child giggles, pointing up at the figure. "His nose is big." You nearly choke on your own breath. Out of all the details, the nose is the one you already worried about. You smirk and mutter, "Big noses mean wisdom." The child's giggle bounces around the chamber, contagious enough that even you grin. Humor keeps the work from breaking you. The brush dips again. You paint a scroll unfurling in the saint's hand, its letters only suggested for now. Villagers watch silently. To them, every line matters. Every stroke feels like revelation. You find it odd. They'll gossip endlessly about crops, marriages, and sheep prices. Yet in here, they fall reverent at a smudge of color. Maybe boredom itself breeds awe. The air grows heavier with bodies gathered inside. A farmer removes his cap, nodding solemnly at the wall. A girl whispers that she wants wings like the saint. You think about how impossible it is to capture wings properly. The feathers never look soft enough. always too stiff or too cartoonish. Still, you imagine adding them later, because children love wings, and wings sell awe better than scrolls. You pause, resting your wrist. The pigment is drying faster than expected. The plaster, too, is tightening. You curse under your breath, then scrape at the edge with your brush, forcing the last of the color into cracks. The villagers don't notice your frantic adjustments. To them, you look like a calm master at work. You laugh silently at the irony. One mainstream fact surfaces while you work. Fresco artists often divided walls into sections, not just by plaster, but also by themes. Narrative cycles of saints or biblical stories, each wall telling a piece of a larger whole. Your saint is only one panel in a long sermon stretched across stone. Someday, villagers will sit here, staring up, piecing together salvation story by story, frame by frame. You feel both pride and weariness at being part of that chain. The whispers swell again. You hear the words miracle and holy tossed around. You sigh, shifting your weight carefully on the plank. If only they knew the miracle is mostly sweat, lime burns, and accidental smears hidden with shadows. But you let them believe. Belief is half the purpose anyway. The villagers edge closer. One leans so near to your pigment dishes that you snap, "Careful!" He jerks back, muttering apologies. You shake your head, no harm done, though you imagine the chaos if he'd tipped over the lapis pouch. Blue treasure wasted on chapel floors. You'd probably faint on the spot. A goat bleats outside, startling the group. They laugh softly, shuffle toward the door, whispering blessings as they leave. Silence returns, thick and almost welcome. You exhale, brush, pausing. For all their curiosity, you prefer solitude. The wall listens better than villagers. You lean in, touching up shadows, steadying outlines, correcting the crooked nose as best you can. It's still bulbous, but less potato-like now. You mutter, "Better. At least the child might approve." And talking to saints as though they're co-workers has become habit. After all, no one else spends as many hours with you here. The light shifts, afternoon sun spilling longer beams across stone. Dust drifts lazily, landing in your wet paint. You sigh, flicking it off with the tip of your brush. Every fresco holds little intrusions. Dust, hairs, fingerprints. Centuries later, scholars will squint at them, write papers about intentional texture. You laugh softly. Intentional, sure. Your shoulders ache, and your knees throb from bracing on the plank. Still, you keep painting, slow and steady. The robe deepens. The halo brightens with faint lime white. The scroll gains letters half legible. The saint now feels rooted. Less ghost, more presence. The villagers might be gone, but their whispers linger in your ears, echoing with both awe and mischief. By the time you rinse your brush, evening edges closer. Outside, voices call across fields. Oxen low. Children chase shadows. Inside, your saint gazes from plaster. Nose large, robe glowing, scroll unfurling. Imperfect, but alive. You step back, arms folded, swaying slightly as the scaffold creaks. Another day nearly gone, another saint nearly born. You smile faintly. Tomorrow, there will be more outlines, more colors, more villagers peeking in with gossip and giggles. Tonight, though, you savor the quiet. Your brushstrokes fused into stone, whispers fading. Chapel breathing with its first figure. The saint glows faintly in the dimming light, but your stomach now growls louder than any chapel bell. It is the signal for the midday break, and no painted robe can argue against hunger. You climb carefully down from the scaffold, knees creaking almost in rhythm with the wood. The ground feels strangely solid after hours above, as if the earth itself has been waiting for you. Outside the chapel door, the air is fresher, though tinged with the smoke of cooking fires and the ever-present scent of livestock. A cluster of villagers gather near a low stone wall, each clutching some form of lunch. Bread loaves tucked under arms, onions dangling by their stalks, wineskins shared without ceremony. You join them, easing down onto the wall, grateful for the excuse to stretch your legs. You tear off a piece of bread, hard at the edges, softer within, and bite. The crust crackles, crumbs sticking to your lips. You chew slowly, each bite filling more with necessity than flavor. Alongside it, you peel an onion with your fingernails, the skin crinkling like old parchment. Its smell rises sharp, enough to sting your eyes, but the sweetness underneath carries comfort. One mainstream fact: onions were a staple in medieval diets, cheap, durable, and considered healthy. Monks recommended them for digestion. Farmers relied on them to last through winter. You smile faintly at the thought. Perhaps saints owed their halos not to holiness, but to steady onion consumption. A villager offers you a sip from a wineskin. You accept, tilting your head back. The liquid is rough, sour with a hint of sweetness, but it washes the onion burn from your mouth. You exhale, shoulders easing. The wine might not be fine, but in this moment it feels like reprieve. The group around you murmurs gossip. Someone complains about goats trampling beans. Another curses the weather, claiming rain will spoil next week's harvest. A third whispers that the mason argued loudly with his wife that morning, though the details shift with each retelling. You listen, nodding occasionally, but your mind drifts. Compared to mixing lime and painting saints, the dramas of goats and beans feel oddly light. You break another piece of bread, dipping it into a scrap of salted pork fat offered by a neighbor. The salt lingers on your tongue, savory and grounding. Hunger softens, and with it your irritation at plaster, scaffolds, and crooked noses. You lean back, letting the sun warm your face. For a moment, you could almost forget the half-finished saint waiting inside. Quirky tidbit for you. Some fresco painters were rumored to carry cloves of garlic in their pockets, believing the smell repelled evil spirits. You glance at your onion and smirk. If that's true, then you're untouchable by now. Garlic and onions together would make you a walking fortress. The thought earns a quiet chuckle, your third joke of the section, slipping into the hum of conversation. A child darts past, chasing a stick, nearly colliding with your knees. You flinch, bread nearly flying from your hand. The villagers laugh softly, one muttering that children never notice saints or scaffolds until they crash into them. You grin, brushing crumbs from your lap. Saints may last centuries, but children will always chase sticks. Your eyes wander across the fields. Sheep cluster in uneven patches, their bells tinkling faintly. A dog barks, chasing them back into order. Beyond, the hills roll in soft green, dotted with thatched roofs and smoke rising lazily. The world looks small from here, manageable, even peaceful. You wonder if villagers will remember this day years from now. Not the onions or gossip, but the faint image of a saint first appearing on their chapel wall. Historians still argue whether villagers truly felt awe at these paintings, or simply treated them as decoration. You suspect the truth lies in both. Awe in the moment, decoration once routine set in. The bread dwindles, the onion shrinks, The wineskin lightens. Laughter fades into sighs. One by one, villagers brush crumbs from tunics, stretch, and drift back to tasks. Fields, flocks, hearths. You linger, reluctant to return just yet. Your muscles plead for more rest. Your fingers ache. Your mind craves quiet. But Fresco waits for no one, and the plaster will not pause out of courtesy. You rise slowly, brushing dust from your knees. The sun slants higher now, shadows shortening. Afternoon approaches, and with it another round of scaffolding, pigment and patience. You nod to the last villager still sitting, who returns the gesture with a smile. There's comfort in these small exchanges. Bread, wine, nods, as if each one stitches you into the fabric of the village, no matter how temporary your presence. Back inside, the chapel feels cooler. The shift from sun to stone, stark. The saint greets you from the wall, silent and unchanged, though perhaps his eyes look faintly amused at your onion breath. You smirk back at him, muttering, "Don't judge. Bread doesn't paint walls." You gather your brushes, jars, and cloths, setting them in order once more. The scaffold looms, ready for your return. Your stomach is calmer now, your spirit lighter. Lunch, humble though it was, has given you the strength to face another climb. The plank creaks as you step up once more, brush in hand, pigments waiting. The saint still needs wings, shading, companions. The wall is far from finished. Yet for now, the memory of bread, onion, and sour wine lingers on your tongue, reminding you that even in a world of saints, the body still demands its share of attention. You lift your brush, dip into ochre once more, and whisper to the saint, "Back to work, then." The wall drinks the color, the lines deepen, and your day resumes, steady as breath. The chapel air grows heavier as the afternoon settles in. Dust floats lazily in the shafts of light cutting across the benches, and the damp plaster glistens under your brush. You shift your weight carefully on the scaffold, listening to the creaks beneath your boots. Every sound echoes more loudly now, amplified by the stillness of the hour. The villagers have gone back to their fields, leaving the chapel to you and the faint scratch of bristles against stone. You dip the brush into a diluted wash of ochre, shading folds of the saint's robe. The pigment seeps quickly, almost too quickly. The plaster, thirsty from morning air, drinks the color greedily. You mutter under your breath, urging it to stay wet long enough for blending. Fresco teaches patience but also panic. Every patch of plaster is a ticking clock. The sun outside shifts lower, its light angling through narrow windows. A golden stripe lands directly across the saint's torso, giving him a glow that your pigments can't quite match. You pause, staring at the coincidence, then chuckle softly. Even the sun thinks he deserves a miracle. Joke one of the hour, whispered to no one but yourself, and perhaps the amused saint. You switch to sienna, deepening shadows under the saint's arm, where the scroll unfurls. Your strokes grow slower, measured, as if the weight of the afternoon presses against your wrist. The chapel's silence feels thicker, broken only by distant bleats and the faint clatter of tools outside. The world narrows to brush, plaster, and the steady beat of your heart. Still, fatigue creeps in. Your shoulders ache, your eyes blur, and once you nearly dip the brush into the wrong jar. Red earth instead of black. You catch yourself just in time, shaking your head. One careless moment, and the saint gains red eyebrows. That would be memorable, though perhaps not the legacy anyone wanted. Mainstream fact, many medieval frescoes faded or discolored over time. not from poor skill, but from the natural chemistry of pigments meeting lime. Blues might dull, greens might darken, reds might fade. You wonder whether your saint will hold his colors centuries from now or become another ghostly outline, studied by scholars, puzzled over by students. Historians still argue whether faded frescoes should be restored with modern paints or left as relics of age. You shrug inwardly. By then, you'll be long gone. So, let them argue. A soft rustle interrupts your thoughts. A sparrow slips through a crack near the roof, wings fluttering before it perches on a beam above your head. It tilts its head at you, chirping once. You grin faintly. You like the view too. The bird hops closer, then ruffles its feathers and drops a tiny gift onto the floor below. You sigh, shaking your head. Quirky tidbit. In some towns, birds were thought to be omens when they entered sacred spaces. A dove meant blessing. A raven meant warning. A sparrow, though, probably just nuisance. You return to work, filling the halo with pale lime wash, adding faint strokes of white to brighten edges. The circle glows faintly against the ochre background, simple yet radiant. From the corner of your eye, the sparrow still watches, head twitching with every stroke of your brush. You wonder if it thinks you're building a rival nest of color. The hours drag on. Shadows inside the chapel stretch long, spilling across benches like dark rivers. The light on the wall shifts, making your colors harder to judge. You squint, adjust, paint by instinct rather than clarity. The saint's features grow sharper, eyes steadier, mouth firmer, scroll letters hinted but unfinished. The figure feels more present now, less ghostly, more anchor than outline. Your brush trembles from fatigue. You set it down, stretching fingers until your knuckles pop. The scaffold creaks as you shift, leaning back to examine your work. From this angle, the saint seems to stand taller, his gaze aimed slightly downward, as though blessing the empty benches. You breathe out slowly, letting pride and exhaustion mix. Your stomach growls again, reminding you that onions only go so far. You chuckle. Joke 2 slips free. If saints lived on bread and onions, then holiness must come with bad breath. The sparrow chirps, as if in agreement. You return to the scroll, steadying your brush for tiny details. Black pigment outlines faint letters, shapes that hint at words. Most villagers cannot read, but the illusion of text is enough. They'll see mystery in the squiggles, perhaps divine language. Only you know it's mostly nonsense, repeated shapes for appearance's sake. Historians still argue whether unreadable text in medieval frescoes was symbolic or simply decorative. You lean toward the latter, given how quickly your hand tires. The air cools slightly as the sun drifts lower. A breeze enters through the window slit, carrying the smell of damp earth and smoke from cooking fires. The sparrow finally departs, leaving silence behind. You continue painting, slower now, savoring each stroke, each blend of shadow. When at last you rinse your brush, the saint feels nearly whole. His robe flows, his halo glows, his scroll unfurls. Imperfections remain, the nose still a little crooked, the hands a bit stiff, but he lives on the wall, steady and solemn. You exhale deeply, relief flooding your chest. You climb down carefully, each step measured, the scaffold groaning farewell. On the ground, you tilt your head back, staring at the figure from below. The saint towers above, colors softened by distance, flaws hidden. This is how villagers will see him, not close enough to judge every line, but far enough to feel awe. That realization eases your worry. From here, the crooked nose is less potato, more dignity. Outside, bells toll faintly, signaling late afternoon. The sound drifts into the chapel, mingling with the echo of your footsteps. You pack brushes into cloth, cover jars, wipe your stained hands on your tunic. The day wanes, but your work remains bright on the wall. You whisper softly to the saint, "Hold steady, till tomorrow." The wall, cool and damp, says nothing, but the silence feels like agreement. Joke 3 arrives as you head for the door. "If you're still crooked by morning, I'm blaming the mason." You grin at your own muttering, pushing the heavy door open. Outside, the world glows in late sun. Fields shimmer gold. Smoke curls lazily. Villagers call across paths. The day bends toward evening, but your saint now bends toward permanence, one more figure added to the endless chain of walls and painters. You breathe in, stretch your aching back, and let the air wash dust from your lungs. Tomorrow will bring more plaster, more colors, more aches. But for now, you step into the lengthening shadows, content that today, at least, left color on stone. The golden glow outside fades slowly, but inside the chapel, the light grows dim and stubborn. You climb back onto the scaffold, balancing your tools with the steady resignation of someone who knows there is still more to finish before the plaster dries. The saint already gazes solemnly from the wall, yet even saints need polishing. The shadows of the late day stretch long, slanting across his robe, and you decide it's time to deepen folds and brighten highlights. Your brush dips into diluted sienna, the pigment swirling like cloudy wine. You steady your hand, drawing long lines where the robe bends. The folds emerge sharper, darker, giving the figure weight. Then you pause, squinting, realizing one line dripped slightly. A thin streak runs downward like a tear. You mutter softly, "Well, maybe saints cry too." Joke number 1, whispered with tired amusement, though you quickly blend the smear into a shadow, hiding evidence of clumsiness. A drop of sweat falls from your brow, landing squarely on the scroll. You groan, smearing it quickly with your thumb. The dampness blurs the pigment, leaving a faint stain. You exhale and shake your head. Quirky tidbit. Some old frescoes still bear handprints, smudges, even footprints of workers who leaned too close or stumbled. Scholars sometimes treat them as mystical symbols, but you know better. They're the signature of accidents, not miracles. You move on, adjusting the halo with pale lime wash. The circle gleams faintly, but a twitch of your wrist leaves it slightly uneven. You step back, squinting. From below, no one will notice. Historians still argue whether halos were meant to be perfect geometric forms, or if their irregularities symbolized humanity. You smile faintly, grateful for such debates. They make mistakes sound intentional. The brush grows heavier in your hand. Your fingers cramp, stained with ochre, black, and faint streaks of red. You set the brush down, stretching until your shoulders pop like old floorboards. The chapel answers with its own creaks, scaffold shifting under your weight. For a moment, you imagine the whole structure groaning in sympathy with your tired body. You pick up another brush, smaller, suited for detail. With black pigment, you refine the saint's eyes, darkening their edges, sharpening their gaze. They stare back at you, steadier than before, more alive, more unsettling. You exhale slowly, whispering, "Don't look at me like that. I'm doing my best." Joke number 2, though part of you wonders if the figure truly does hold some presence now. The silence of the chapel makes every whisper feel heavier, as though the walls are listening. The sun drops further, light dimming, shadows thickening. You light a small lantern, its flame flickering, throwing uneven glow across the wall. The colors shift under its warmth, ochres deepening, blacks softening. You tilt your head. Perhaps this is how villagers will see the saint during evening prayers, lantern light trembling across his robe. The thought steadies your hand as you touch up the scroll, adding faint strokes of white to suggest parchment shine. Fatigue weighs heavier. Your eyes blur, and once you nearly dip the brush into the lantern oil instead of water, you curse softly, catching yourself. You chuckle after, muttering, "Imagine painting with lamp oil. Flaming saints. That's new." Joke number 3, offered to the empty benches. The laugh steadies you enough to keep going. The air grows cooler. Outside, you hear faint voices calling children home, dogs barking, a cart rolling past. Inside, it is only you, the saint, and the faint hiss of brush against plaster. You focus on small details now, shading a hand, thickening a fold, softening the jawline. The work is slow but soothing, each stroke a breath, each shadow a heartbeat. Mainstream fact: fresco painting demanded not just artistry, but planning. For once pigment set, it became stone. Painters had to know their figures before touching the wall. That is why cartoons existed, why pouncing was vital. Every mistake today is immortal tomorrow. You remind yourself of this with each stroke, though fatigue tempts you to hurry. You resist. Better to leave a gap unfinished than to smear haste across plaster. You pause, setting the brush down, flexing fingers. Your hands are raw, fingertips cracked, nails rimmed with black. You glance at them and think, half serious, that saints should include painters among their miracles, to endure scaffolds, lime burns, dust, and aching joints without losing all humor. Surely that deserves a halo of its own. You lean back on the plank, staring at your work. The saint looms now with stronger presence, robe shaded, scroll defined, halo glowing uneven but steady. Imperfections remain, yet from below they vanish into the whole. The figure is alive enough to stir awe, strong enough to survive centuries, stubborn enough to outlast your aching body. The lantern flickers, shadows shifting across the wall. For a moment, the saint seems to move, his robe swaying, his eyes glinting. You blink, shake your head, laugh softly. It is only light and fatigue, illusions of tired eyes. Yet the feeling lingers, unsettling and comforting at once. Your body begs for rest, but you tidy your tools first. Brushes rinsed in water, pigments capped, cloths folded. The scaffold groans as you climb down, knees stiff, boots heavy. On the ground, you tilt your head back once more, studying the saint from below. The glow of the lantern exaggerates his solemn gaze, making him seem almost alive. You exhale, whispering a quiet promise. I'll give you wings tomorrow. Outside, the bells toll faintly, signaling evening. The sound drifts through the door, mixing with the smell of cooking fires and the faint murmur of villagers finishing their day. You feel hunger again, sharper this time, but also relief. Another day's work sealed in plaster, another figure closer to completion. You push the door open, stepping into the cool air. Shadows stretch long across the fields, the sky deepening toward indigo. Smoke curls upward, and faint laughter carries from cottages. You breathe deeply, the air fresh after dust and lime. Tomorrow will demand more, but tonight you walk toward the promise of stew and bread, soot on your face, colors on your hands, and a faint smile lingering. The chapel door creaks shut behind you, sealing the saint within, glowing faintly in lantern light, waiting for dawn. The morning after always begins with stiff joints and a faint cough from too much lime dust. But today, an added tension lingers in the air. You hear the mason's voice before you even step through the chapel door, its grumble bouncing off stone like a chisel striking rock. He stands with arms crossed, scowling up at the wall as though the saint himself had insulted his work. You set down your tools, already bracing. He jabs a finger toward the arch, muttering about misaligned stones and cracks that threaten the whole fresco. You glance up, squinting. To your eye, the wall is solid enough. The plaster holds, the colors breathe. But masons see differently. For them, every crack is an omen, every seam a personal accusation. You climb partway up the scaffold, tracing your hand along the surface. The stone feels cool, the plaster firm. It will hold, you say softly, though your tone carries little conviction. The mason snorts, muttering something about painters not understanding real building. His words echo sharply in the quiet chapel. Mainstream fact. Medieval construction sites often hosted disputes between masons, carpenters, and painters. Each trade guarded its authority, sometimes clashing over ownership of walls, arches, or scaffolds. You, unfortunately, stand at the center of such rivalries, brush in hand, while others wield hammers. Historians still argue whether guild systems fostered cooperation or deepened rivalries. Judging from this moment, rivalry seems the winner. The mason's complaints grow louder, his words spilling into accusations. You feel irritation building, heat rising beneath your dust-streaked collar. Yet you keep your voice calm, almost bored. Your stones give me something to paint on. My colors give your stones meaning. Without both, the chapel is empty. He stares, mouth twitching, unsure whether to laugh or curse. Quirky tidbit. Some fresco workshops reportedly bribed masons with wine or bread to keep scaffolds steady and cracks patched. You imagine slipping him an onion just to see his reaction. Instead, you hand him a small brush, joking, "Here, try shading a robe if the cracks bother you so much." Joke 1, offered with weary sarcasm. The mason doesn't laugh, but he does mutter less sharply. You both stand in silence for a while, him inspecting stone, you staring at your saint. The tension softens, though never disappears. Finally, he shrugs, as if surrendering. Do what you will. If the wall falls, it is your shame. He stomps off, boots echoing down the aisle. You exhale deeply, relief mixed with lingering irritation. The saint seems to smirk from his plaster perch, amused by mortal quarrels. You climb back onto the scaffold, shaking your head. Argument leaves your hands jittery, your brush uncertain. You dip into black pigment, outlining the scroll again, steadying your strokes. The rhythm of painting soothes more than words. Slowly, anger seeps away, replaced by focus. The chapel is quiet again, save for your brush and the occasional flutter of wings outside. You shade deeper folds into the robe, add faint highlights to the halo. The saint's eyes sharpen, gaze steady. You whisper, "At least you don't argue about cracks." Joke 2 slips out, softer this time, bringing a faint smile back to your face. Time passes slowly. Sunlight creeps higher, beams shifting across the floor. You pause to stretch, arms heavy, knees sore from bracing on the plank. Down below, tools lie scattered, pigment jars waiting. Up here, the world narrows to stone and color. Your stomach growls again, reminding you of yesterday's onions. You sigh, glancing at the half-finished saint. He seems patient enough to wait until lunch. You return to work, shading the scroll, blending earth tones until parchment seems to curl. For a moment, it almost feels alive. Mainstream fact. Medieval fresco painters often left hidden marks in scrolls. Tiny initials, dates, or symbols. Traces of themselves hidden within divine texts. You consider adding your mark, a faint line tucked in the folds, invisible to villagers, but perhaps noticed centuries later. Historians still argue over whether such marks were pride or prayer. You lean toward pride. After all, a painter deserves to leave a fingerprint somewhere. Your hand slips briefly, leaving a faint smear across the scroll's edge. You curse, then quickly reshape it into shading. Another accident disguised, another miracle claimed. You chuckle softly. Joke 3 arrives. If every mistake is a miracle, I'm holier than the whole parish. The sound echoes faintly, a private comedy act shared with plaster and dust. The saint looms larger as shadows deepen, his presence filling the chapel more with each stroke. Yet tension lingers in your shoulders, a memory of the mason's scowl. You shake it off, reminding yourself the wall will stand longer than either of you. Stone and paint together make permanence. Arguments fade. Outside, bells toll faintly, the sound drifting through cracks and windows. You pause, listening. Villagers move about, their voices carrying. Shouts over fields, laughter near wells, bleating goats. The world continues its rhythms while you perch on a plank, coaxing color into life. The afternoon stretches. You work slower, fatigue seeping into limbs. Yet progress shows. The scroll glows brighter, the robe heavier, the halo steadier. Your saint feels anchored now, less ghost, more guardian. You exhale, satisfaction warming your chest. At last, you rinse your brush, setting it carefully aside. The scaffold groans as you climb down, knees aching. On the floor, you tilt your head back, studying your work. The saint looks down calmly, unbothered by cracks, plaster, or quarrels. You nod faintly, whispering, "Ignore the mason. You'll outlast us both." Evening approaches. Shadows stretch across benches. Lanterns are lit outside cottages. Smoke curls in the distance. You tidy brushes, cap jars, fold cloths. The day's disputes fade into the quiet hum of completion. The wall holds. The saint endures. You push the chapel door open, stepping into cool air. The sky glows faintly orange. Fields hushed. Villagers drifting home. You breathe deeply, the air crisp after lime and dust. Tomorrow may bring more cracks, more arguments, more aches. But tonight, you leave the saint steady on his wall, gazing down in quiet defiance of time and tempers. The morning greets you with a damp chill, and for once it isn't just your joints complaining. Clouds crowd the sky, their edges heavy with rain, and you feel it in the air before a drop even falls. By the time you step into the chapel, the first faint patter begins against the roof. You glance upward, uneasy. The ceiling stones have always looked solid enough, but water has a way of finding cracks no mason admits exist. You climb the scaffold, brush in hand, determined to keep working despite the weather. At first, the drizzle outside seems harmless, just a soft drumbeat against stone. But then, a faint line of moisture trickles down the corner near your saint. You frown, leaning closer. A dark streak spreads across the plaster, threatening to blur hours of labor. You mutter under your breath, "Of course the heavens choose today to weep." Joke 1, delivered more in irritation than humor, but still enough to ease the sting. The leak grows. Droplets gather, sliding along the edge of your halo like tears of stone. You scramble down, searching for anything to cover it. A scrap of cloth, a plank, even your own tunic if necessary. You climb back quickly, pinning cloth against the wall with trembling hands. The fabric absorbs the first drops, darkening with each strike. You press harder, whispering prayers you're not sure anyone listens to. Mainstream fact: fresco survives centuries, yet it is fragile in its youth. Moisture can ruin colors before they set, turning halos into stains, scrolls into blotches. Many early works vanished not from neglect, but from leaky roofs and damp walls. Historians still argue whether builders underestimated the damage water could do, or whether artists simply worked faster to outrun weather. You now know firsthand, water always wins if given time. The rain outside strengthens, a steady hiss against the roof. More drips appear, dotting the scaffold, splattering pigment jars. You scramble again, pulling your cloak from a peg and draping it over the jars. The sight is ridiculous. Saints and scrolls guarded by muddy cloth. But necessity laughs at dignity. Quirky tidbit. In one story, a painter supposedly used a sheep's bladder as a makeshift cover during storms. You glance upward, muttering, "At least I didn't bring livestock inside." The noise of rain deepens, filling the chapel with echoes. The villagers outside shout faintly, chasing goats into shelter, their voices drowned by water. You remain perched on the scaffold, clutching cloth against plaster, your heart hammering as though holding back a flood with bare hands. The saint's eyes, half finished, seem to watch you with patience, almost amusement. You groan softly, whispering, "Don't laugh at me. If you wanted rain, you could have prayed yourself." Joke 2, offered with weary defiance. Minutes crawl. Water runs down the cloth, dripping onto the plank below. You reposition it, cursing softly as drops spatter your sleeve. Your hands ache from holding it in place. Finally, the storm eases slightly, the pounding softening into drizzle. Relief seeps into your chest as the trickles slow. The cloth still damp, but no longer overwhelmed. You peel it back carefully. The plaster glistens, edges blurred, but not destroyed. The halo holds. The robe remains intact, though faint streaks mar the scroll. You sigh deeply, shoulders slumping. It could have been worse. You whisper to the saint, "Forgive the stains. Even heaven leaks sometimes." Joke 3, half-hearted, but enough to lighten the weight pressing on your chest. The rain lingers for hours, dripping through tiny cracks in rhythm with your heartbeat. You climb down, setting jars safely aside, wiping your hands on your tunic. The chapel smells of damp stone, lime, and wet cloth. You breathe slowly, calming yourself, reminding your body that the storm is passing. Mainstream fact: some fresco painters worked with assistants whose sole job was to guard walls against moisture, waving fans, patching leaks, even holding burning torches near plaster to keep it dry. You imagine such luxury with envy. Instead, you alone juggle brush, cloth, and panic. Historians still argue whether such assistants were apprentices learning craft or mere laborers hired to save time. Either way, you could use one now. The drizzle tapers, then stops, leaving silence heavy in the chapel. You climb again, studying the damage. The saint's scroll bears faint streaks, but nothing beyond repair. You dip your brush in black pigment, carefully redrawing blurred lines, steadying the letters. Slowly, the text reappears, firming under your hand. Relief fills you, each stroke a small victory against weather's indifference. The halo needs touch-ups too. You mix fresh lime wash, brushing gently to brighten its edge. The damp plaster resists, but patience wins. Soon, the circle glows again, faint yet steady. You exhale, satisfied, though exhaustion drags your shoulders down. The storm leaves behind a cool hush. The chapel air feels cleaner, though the scent of wet earth lingers. You pause to listen, droplets falling from eaves outside, a distant rooster crowing despite the gloom. Inside, the saint stands firm, his gaze unshaken by streaks or rain. You whisper softly, "You've survived worse already. You'll endure this, too." You tidy the cloths, wring them out near the door, hang them to dry. Your cloak remains stained, yet you shrug. It has seen worse. Brushes are rinsed, pigments recapped. You move slower now, every limb heavy. The day has stolen more energy than paint alone should demand. As dusk approaches, you climb down for the last time. The scaffold groans, tired as you are. On the ground, you tilt your head back, staring at your saint. He looks whole again, robe glowing, halo steady, scroll legible. The faint streaks remain if you search, but from below, they vanish into the hole. Relief floods you, warm and fragile. You step outside, greeted by cool air and dripping eaves. The sky clears, clouds drifting apart, streaks of orange breaking through. Villagers call across the fields, gathering animals, shaking water from cloaks. Smoke rises from chimneys, carrying scents of stew and bread. You breathe deeply, grateful for dry ground beneath your boots. The chapel door creaks shut behind you, sealing your saint inside. He remains there, damp but resilient, colors still clinging to plaster despite heaven's meddling. Tomorrow, you'll return, patch the rest, strengthen outlines, mend halos. But tonight, you walk toward warmth, soot on your face, rain in your hair, and relief in your chest. The storm's memory lingers in the chapel, a damp chill clinging to stone, even as the morning sun pushes through clouds. You climb the scaffold again, brush in hand, grateful for clearer skies. But before you dip into pigments, another sound filters through the walls. Chanting, low and uneven, swelling, then fading like waves. You pause, listening. The monks must be rehearsing for Sunday Mass. Their voices rise together, a murmur of Latin syllables bending across notes. Some land steady, others wobble like cartwheels over ruts. You grin faintly. If angels sing like that, heaven must have headaches. Joke one, whispered to yourself, though the echoes make it sound as though even the saint on your wall chuckled. You set brush to plaster, shading the scroll again, but the chanting keeps tugging at your attention. It bounces off stone, filling the chapel until you feel surrounded by invisible singers. The tones are uneven, yet oddly soothing, like water running over rocks. Mainstream fact: Gregorian chant, with its plain unison melodies, shaped worship across medieval Europe, designed less for harmony and more for focus, guiding minds toward prayer. You exhale slowly, letting its rhythm settle into your strokes. A monk's voice cracks on a high note, the sound breaking the solemn spell. You bite your lip to stifle laughter. Quirky tidbit. Some monasteries kept strict punishments for singers who faltered, from fasting to scrubbing floors. You imagine explaining to that poor monk that his cracked note will be immortalized in paint through your snicker. Joke 2 slides out as you mutter, "Maybe I'll give him a halo shaped like a goose's neck." The voices grow louder, then softer, drifting in waves. You paint in rhythm, each brush stroke aligning with a phrase. Robe folds deepen, halo edges brighten. The saint grows firmer, steadier, as though lifted by the chant itself. For a fleeting moment, you forget sore wrists and aching knees. The wall becomes music, pigment a hymn. Historians still argue whether such chanting inspired fresco painters directly or merely provided background noise. You suspect the answer is both. Rhythm seeps into hands whether one welcomes it or not. Even your brush wobbles in time with a particularly drawn-out syllable. You shake your head, muttering, "Stay steady. He's supposed to bless, not dance." Joke 3, offered with weary affection for both wall and monks. The chanting stops suddenly, leaving silence heavy and strange. Your brush halts mid-stroke, as though it too depended on the voices. You blink, adjusting to quiet. The absence feels louder than the song itself, a hollow echo ringing in your ears. You sigh, resuming carefully, filling gaps with patient color. Outside, birds chirp, goats bleat faintly, the ordinary world reclaiming sound. Inside, only your breath and bristles remain. Yet you carry the echo of chant within your strokes, faint rhythm guiding even silence. The saint now seems more solemn, gaze steadier, as though he too has heard and approved. You lean back, shoulders sagging, brush still in hand. The wall glows faintly with progress. For all the uneven notes, the monks gave you rhythm enough to carry the day. You whisper to the saint, "Next time they miss a note, try not to laugh." His silence, steady and patient, feels almost like agreement. By late afternoon, your limbs ache, but the scroll is clearer, the robe richer, the halo brighter. You rinse brushes slowly, listening for any returning chant. None comes. The silence is final, but the memory remains, stitched into plaster and pigment. You climb down carefully, glance up once more. The saint gazes back, silent yet resonant, as though holding faint music in his eyes. You exhale, smile faintly, and pack your tools. Tomorrow will bring more strokes, more aches, perhaps more voices. But tonight, you carry chant and color together, echoes humming quietly as the chapel settles into dusk. Evening edges closer, and the chapel sinks into shadow. You light a small lantern, its flame flickering across the scaffold, making the saint's robe shimmer in warm golds and browns. The air smells of smoke now, faint curls drifting upward as the wick crackles. The lantern light trembles against the plaster, giving the halo a glow that no pigment could achieve. For a moment, you imagine the figure alive, shifting slightly with the sway of shadows. Your brush dips into ultramarine, the rare pigment finally opened from its pouch. The grains sparkle faintly, a treasure poured into water. You grind carefully, though your wrists ache from the day's earlier labor. When the paste is smooth, you lift your brush and test it against plaster. The blue spread slowly, staining the robe's inner lining. Its brilliance startles even you. Deep, luminous, as though the wall suddenly held a piece of sky. Mainstream fact. Ultramarine, ground from lapis lazuli, was once more valuable than gold, reserved for the most sacred subjects. Patrons often demanded it only for the Virgin Mary's robes, ensuring their devotion was painted in wealth as well as color. Historians still argue whether painters ever stretched this pigment with lesser blues, deceiving patrons to save expense. You swirl your brush, half smiling at the thought. Would anyone in this village know the difference between lapis and azurite? The lantern wavers, casting uneven shadows across the scaffold. You lean close, steadying your hand. The pigment sinks into plaster like a secret, fusing instantly. No chance for correction. Your brush slips slightly, a drop trailing downward. You curse softly, then smear it into a shadow line. Mistakes, always masquerading as divine mysteries. Quirky tidbit. In some frescoes, restorers found hidden outlines beneath layers, suggesting artists sometimes covered their own slips with fresh plaster. You sigh, thinking how much easier it would be if you could simply paint over errors like parchment scribes. Your stomach growls faintly, reminding you of bread and stew waiting later. But for now, you push on. The ultramarine deepens the scene, turning the saint's robe from ordinary earth tones into celestial brilliance. You exhale slowly, shoulders easing, as though the color itself grants relief. The chapel feels fuller, more alive, its dim corners suddenly awake with blue. Outside, voices drift faintly, villagers calling across lanes, laughter from children running home before dark. Their words fade into hums against the stone. Inside, the only sounds are the scratch of brush, the creak of scaffold, and the faint hiss of lantern. You pause, tilting your head back, staring at the half-finished figure glowing faintly above. It feels both exhausting and sacred to see hours of grinding and smearing transform into something resembling awe. You whisper to the saint, "You look better dressed than I do." Joke one, soft and tired, yet it makes you grin despite aching arms. You smear more blue, filling folds, letting shadows deepen. The robe now seems weighty, carrying dignity you could never give alone. Fatigue creeps in again, blurring your eyes. Once you nearly dip your brush into the wrong jar, catching yourself at the last second. A crooked stroke nearly bends a fold unnaturally, but you disguise it quickly with darker shadow. You mutter, "If villagers believe every smudge has meaning, then I'm the holiest fraud alive." Joke two slips free, soft laughter following in the quiet chapel. The lantern sputters, flame shrinking. You adjust the wick, coaxing it brighter. The light casts moving halos across the wall, multiplying the saint's circle into ghostly doubles. You blink, shaking your head. The illusion unsettles yet comforts, as though you're not alone in your work. Your back throbs from leaning forward, your knees stiff from bracing. You rest the brush briefly, flexing fingers. Pigments shimmer faintly in their dishes, colors dulled by shadow, yet still vibrant against plaster. You sip from your water skin, the liquid lukewarm, but welcome. Then you set back to work, determined to finish the robe's blue before exhaustion defeats you. Mainstream fact again whispers in memory. Fresco required completion of each giornata, the day's plaster section, before it dried. If left unfinished, a seam would appear, a visible line dividing colors. Many frescoes today still show those seams, records of labor divided by fatigue and daylight. You glance at your saint's robe, determined not to leave such a scar tonight. You push on, each stroke slower but steady. Blue fills the robe, deepening, glowing under lantern fire. The saint now feels anchored, alive enough to hold the chapel in silence. You exhale, brush trembling, body nearly spent. At last, you rinse the brush carefully, swirling pigment into water until the bristles run pale. You set it aside, fold cloths, cap jars. Your hands shake slightly as you wipe them clean. The scaffold groans as you climb down, every step measured, every knee aching. On the ground, you tilt your head back, studying your work from below. The robe glows richly, the halo steadies, the scroll unfurls brighter than before. From this angle, imperfections vanish into the whole. The saint gazes down with quiet authority, as though he has always been there. Relief floods your chest. The day has been long, but it leaves behind permanence. Joke 3 arrives as you mutter softly, "If you don't impress them on Sunday, it won't be my fault." The silence answers with patience, as though the saint accepts your weary bargain. You tidy tools one final time, fold the damp cloths, and blow gently across the lantern until its flame fades. The chapel sinks into darkness, save for faint moonlight through narrow windows. Your saint remains glowing in memory, even as shadows swallow the room. You push open the heavy door, stepping into cool night air. The sky clears, stars pricking through dark, a thin crescent moon hanging low. Villagers' cottages glow faintly with firelight, smoke drifting upward, mingling with the scent of stew. You breathe deeply, stretching your back, soot on your skin, blue still staining your fingers. The chapel door closes behind you, sealing the saint within. He waits there now, robed in blue, halo glowing faintly in the dark, guardian of stone and silence until dawn returns. The dawn creeps pale and cold across the valley, mist hanging low among the fields. You rise stiffly from your straw bed, joints aching, hands still faintly stained blue from yesterday's ultramarine. The chapel door groans as you push it open, and the cool hush greets you like a waiting companion. Inside, the saint stands firm on his plaster perch, robe gleaming faintly in early light. The blue has dried rich and steady, holding its brilliance even without lantern fire. Relief warms you, though the day's duties weigh heavier still. Before more colors touch plaster, the tools demand care. Brushes sit in a clay jar, their bristles stiff with residue. You carry them to a bucket of water, dipping each one carefully, squeezing bristles between calloused fingers until pigment swirls out like faint smoke. The water clouds, blue first, then brown, then streaks of black. You stir it with a stick, grimacing at the smell. Old lime clings stubbornly, as though refusing to let go. Quirky tidbit. In some workshops, apprentices were punished if brushes hardened, forced to chew bristles soft again. You smirk faintly, muttering, "At least my teeth are spared." Joke 1. Grim, but enough to bring a private chuckle. You lay brushes on cloth, patting them dry. The bristles fan out, looking more like bedraggled feathers than tools of holiness. You inspect handles, tightening threads that bind hog hair to sticks. Some wobble dangerously. One snaps under pressure. You sigh, setting it aside. Tools wear down like people. Slowly, inevitably. Mainstream fact. Medieval painters often made their own brushes, binding animal hair with string and glue, sometimes attaching them to goose quills or reeds. You imagine a row of monks crafting brushes as solemnly as relics, though in truth it was likely more grumbling than reverence. Pigment jars come next. You uncap each carefully, inspecting dried edges. Red earth clings thick around one rim, threatening to crumble. Black soot has hardened slightly, requiring a splash of water. Ultramarine still glimmers faintly, grains sunk to the bottom of its dish like stars in shallow pools. You stir gently, coaxing color back to life. Historians still argue whether pigments were kept sealed tight in oilcloth or left open to air for convenience. Judging by the crust around your jars, air wins more often than it should. The scaffold looms above, silent, still faintly damp from the storm's leaks. You climb slowly, brushes balanced in one hand, cloth tucked at your belt. The boards creak in protest, as though tired of your daily weight. You pat one plank lightly, muttering, "Hold on a little longer. We're nearly done." Joke 2. Whispered affection for wood that endures as loyally as any saint. From your perch, you scan the wall. The saint glows steady, but edges need sharpening. Outlines require cleaning, and shadows crave depth. You dip a smaller brush into black pigment, tracing gently along folds of the robe. Each line darkens, giving weight, making cloth seem heavier, more real. You lean close, careful not to smear with your sleeve. The smell of lime rises faintly, chalky and sour, reminding you of buckets waiting below. Your hands cramp, fingers stiff from repetition. You set the brush down, flexing slowly. The silence of the chapel presses close, broken only by your breathing and faint groans of scaffold wood. You glance at the saint, his gaze solemn as ever, and whisper, "You don't have to stare. I'll finish." Joke 3. Weary yet soft, filling the hush with your own voice. Mainstream fact. Fresco painters ended each day by cleaning thoroughly, not just for order, but for survival. Pigments spoiled quickly if left damp, and lime ate through bristles overnight. The day's labor would vanish if tools weren't tended. You think of your jars, your brushes, your aching body, all temporary, yet linked to permanence on the wall. You climb down, carrying jars carefully, placing them back on the bench. One spills slightly, a trickle of red staining your hand. You smear it on your tunic with a shrug. Clothes are long past saving. You rinse the dish, swirl water until color fades, then set it upside down to dry. The sun climbs higher, beams slicing through narrow windows, catching dust in glowing streaks. You move slowly through routine, brushes rinsed, cloths wrung, pigments stirred, scaffold inspected. Each task is small, almost invisible, but each keeps the work alive. The saint's presence now feels less like miracle and more like witness, watching you fuss over tools with steady patience. You pause, wiping sweat already forming, though the air remains cool. Your hands rest on the bench, trembling faintly from fatigue. Yet there is satisfaction in order. Brushes lined, jars sealed, cloths folded. You exhale, shoulders loosening. The chapel hums softly with quiet, its emptiness filled only by your own labors. Outside, bells toll faintly, the sound drifting in with the scent of baking bread. You smile, imagining villagers shrugging into cloaks, heading for fields, gossiping already. None will think of brushes or jars, yet tomorrow they will kneel before colors those brushes birthed. You find comfort in that paradox. Your work invisible, its result unforgettable. The saint gazes down, robe blue, halo glowing faintly, scroll unfurled. You nod to him, whispering, "Tools clean, colors waiting. Tomorrow we paint again." His silence feels like a scent. You gather cloths, drape them over jars, set brushes neatly. The scaffold creaks as you step away, leaving it still and silent. The chapel returns to quiet, your presence fading, though the saint remains steady. The door groans as you push it open. Cool air greets you, sunlight spilling across damp grass, the world alive with bleats, shouts, and crows. Behind you, the tools rest, the saint glows, and the chapel breathes patience. Ahead, supper waits, with bread, stew, and gossip. Between the two, you walk, soot on your hands, colors in your veins, and quiet satisfaction in your chest. The day tilts toward evening, the sun sliding low across the hills, and you find yourself drawn back to the heart of the village. The chapel door closes behind you with its familiar groan, leaving the saint alone in dim light, robe glowing faintly as if lit from within. Your body aches from climbing and bending, your hands stiff from brushes, and all you can think of is supper. Supper is not a feast, not in this village, but it is warmth, a pause, a reward for bodies dragged through long days. You follow the scent before you see the fire, smoke curling from a low cottage chimney, mingling with onion sweetness and the faint tang of simmering meat. Your stomach growls, impatient. The villager hosting tonight's meal greets you with a nod, and you duck into the cottage, where shadows bend in orange firelight. The room is crowded, children on benches, elders by the hearth, dogs curled in corners, all voices rising together in a hum that sounds like comfort. A pot bubbles above the fire, its surface trembling with each pop. The stew inside is thick, a broth of barley, turnips, onions, and shreds of salted pork. You accept a wooden bowl and crouch near the flames. The first spoonful scalds your tongue, but you swallow eagerly anyway. It tastes of earth and smoke, rough but filling, the kind of food that binds muscles and keeps brushes steady. Mainstream fact, barley stews like this were staples of medieval suppers, stretching cheap grains with whatever scraps of vegetables or meat could be spared. Bread on the side turns thin soup into heavy meals. You tear at the crust of dark rye bread, dipping it into broth, letting it soften before chewing. Crumbs stick to your lips. The crust scratches your gums, but hunger silences complaint. A jug of ale passes from hand to hand, each villager tipping it before wiping with a sleeve. You sip when it reaches you, the liquid sour and faintly sweet, washing onion burn from your mouth. Quirky tidbit. Some households flavored ale with herbs like bog myrtle or rosemary, more for distraction than taste. Tonight's ale tastes mostly of effort, but effort is enough. Conversation hums around you. A farmer complains about a cow refusing to milk. A woman mutters about her son chasing geese instead of chopping wood. A child boasts he saw the saint in the chapel blink, only to be shushed by his mother. You smirk quietly into your bowl. The villager's awe feels strange, knowing the saint's gaze is your shaky brushstroke. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers saw painted saints as symbolic images or living presences. Sitting here, stew dripping from your spoon, you suspect the truth is simple. They believed enough to argue, laugh and hush children over it. You finish your bowl quickly, warmth spreading through your chest. A second ladleful appears before you can protest, thicker with barley this time. The fire crackles, sparks dancing upward, smoke stinging your eyes. You blink, half dreaming as the room sways with chatter. For a moment, exhaustion overtakes you, head nodding, spoon still in hand. The laughter of neighbors jolts you awake, and you grin sheepishly. Joke 1 escapes your lips. "Careful, or I'll paint saints asleep on the wall tomorrow." The room chuckles, approving your weariness. The children clamor for stories, tugging at sleeves, wide-eyed in firelight. An elder clears his throat, beginning a tale of wolves in winter, of lanterns glowing in snow, of prayers whispered into the dark. His voice wavers, but holds, each word a thread weaving villagers closer. You sip ale again, leaning back against rough timber, letting the story drift over you like smoke. You imagine painting the tale on plaster someday. Wolves, lanterns, saints watching from snow, but know the budget stretches only for halos and scrolls. Still, imagination lingers. The elder pauses, coughing, and another villager picks up with a joke about goats eating church candles. Laughter shakes the room. You join in, nearly spilling stew, the warmth of humor sweeter than ale. Joke 2 slides from your lips in response. At least goats leave less wax than masons leave cracks. The room bursts louder, the mason not present to defend himself. Laughter softens tension more than bread ever could. The fire burns lower, coals glowing red. Children doze against mothers' laps. Dogs shift in dreams. Villagers' voices slow into murmurs. You scrape the last of stew from your bowl, chew the last tough edge of bread. Satisfaction settles heavy in your stomach, warmth in your chest, weariness in your bones. You lean back, watching sparks drift upward like tiny saints of smoke. Mainstream fact: evening meals like this not only fed bodies, but bound communities. Supper was where gossip turned into memory, where laughter eased labor, where even quarrels with masons softened into shared bread. Historians still argue whether such meals were primarily practical or spiritual in nature. You lean toward both. Hunger is filled, but so is loneliness. The jug of ale makes one final round, nearly empty. You take a sip, savoring its faint bite, then pass it on. The elder finishes his tale softly, voice nearly drowned by crackle of embers. Silence settles afterward, heavy but gentle, the kind that lulls eyelids closed. You whisper joke 3 into your bowl, too soft for others to hear. If saints live on onions and barley, I'm halfway holy already. Your quiet chuckle fills only your own ears. The host clears bowls, stacking them by the hearth. You stand slowly, legs stiff, knees groaning. A child stirs awake long enough to wave at you before sinking back to sleep. You smile faintly, nodding, then step toward the door. Outside, the night greets you cool and sharp, stars bright above, the moon thin and pale. Smoke drifts from chimneys, fields stretch dark, crickets hum faintly in grass. You walk slowly back toward the chapel, stew settling heavy in your belly, body weighted by food and fatigue. The door looms, its iron hinges cold under your hand. Inside, the chapel waits silent, saint steady, scaffold still. You light a small lantern, place it on the bench, and tidy what little remains. Cloth folded, jars capped tighter, brushes lined. Tools cleaned earlier now rest orderly, ready for tomorrow. You climb once more, just to check the wall. The robe still glows, halo steady. Scroll, legible. No new streaks, no leaks. Relief eases your shoulders. You sit briefly on the plank, lantern below throwing shadows upward, making the saint appear taller, sterner, more alive. You exhale slowly, whispering, "Hold steady tonight. Tomorrow, more color." The lantern flickers, your eyelids heavy. You descend carefully, extinguish the flame, and push the door closed behind you. Outside, stars shimmer colder. But inside your chest, warmth lingers from stew, bread, ale, and laughter. The village sleeps, the saint waits, and you walk toward your own straw bed, soot on your face, stories in your ears, and satisfaction carried like a quiet shield against the long night. The final day draws close, though in truth you've lost count of dawns and dusks spent climbing scaffolds and scrubbing brushes. The chapel smells faintly of lime, soot, and bread brought in by curious villagers who sneak peeks when you're too tired to protest. Tonight, though, the space belongs only to you, the saint, and the slow labor of closing work. Lanterns glow along benches, their flames soft and steady, shadows stretching upward in quiet waves. The fresco dries in patches, some darker, some brighter, but all together holding steady like a patient companion. You climb once more, every plank groaning, every joint of your body echoing those creaks. The saint gazes down, robe brilliant, halo imperfect but glowing nonetheless. You hold a brush dipped in white lime wash, tracing final highlights. The scroll brightens under your touch, letters catching faint gleam, folds deepening into contrast. The wall hums quietly with presence, as if it breathes through pigment. Your hand trembles with fatigue, but the strokes land true enough. You whisper softly, "There, that's your last breath from me." Joke one, small but needed, easing the heaviness of your chest. You step back, balancing carefully, staring at the whole figure. Imperfections remain, but from below they'll vanish. Villagers will see dignity, not crooked lines. Historians still argue whether perfection was ever the goal of rural chapels, or if awe alone mattered. Staring now, you believe awe suffices. Lantern light flickers, casting the robe in shifting hues. For a moment, the saint appears to move, robe swaying as though stirred by invisible wind. You shake your head, smile faintly, mutter "Bukwantu." If you start walking, I'm charging extra. Shadows swallow your grin, but the thought lingers warm. The final brushstroke lands across the halo, sealing circle and color. You rinse the brush slowly, watching blue and white bleed into water. Then you set it down, folding cloths, capping jars, knowing this is the last time for this wall. Quirky tidbit. Some painters left fingerprints hidden in corners, secret signatures of weary pride. You consider it, then press one stained fingertip into a patch of plaster near the saint's robe. Small, unseen, but yours. The scaffolding moans as you climb down for the last time. On the ground, you tilt your head back, lantern glow spreading across the wall. The saint towers now, scroll unfurled, robe radiant, halo steady. He blesses the silence, and perhaps you, though exhaustion blinds you to certainty. Still, pride swells faintly, tempered by sore hands and bruised knees. Villagers drift in quietly, murmuring awe, crossing themselves, whispering prayers. Children tug mothers' sleeves, pointing at wings you never painted, swearing they see them anyway. You smile faintly, muttering joke 3. If imagination adds wings, I'll take credit. The crowd does not hear, but laughter rests quietly in your chest. The night deepens, bells toll faintly. and you blow across the lantern until the flame dies. Darkness folds around Fresco, but you know the colors remain, drying silently, ready to endure seasons, storms, centuries. You step outside, stars scattering across sky, fields hushed, cottages glowing faintly. The chapel door closes behind you, wood groaning, stone settling. Work ends, but its echo remains. Now the work is finished, the brushes washed, the cloths folded, and the chapel rests in quiet darkness. The fresco waits behind closed doors, its colors softening into permanence, its saint gazing steadily across the empty benches. The night outside is cool, stars scattered gently above fields that breathe with crickets and the hush of distant bells. You walk slowly, every step lighter than the last, though your body still aches with weariness. The air smells of damp earth and faint smoke from hearths. Lanterns flicker faintly in cottage windows, each one a beacon of warmth against shadow. You breathe deeply, letting the cool air steady your chest, your mind drifting gently toward rest. Images of the day blur together, scaffolds creaking, pigments staining your fingers, villagers whispering in awe, children pointing at saints they believed alive. All of it fades now into softness, like brushstrokes melting into plaster. You settle near your straw bed, the sounds of night weaving quietly around you. Somewhere a dog barks once, then silence returns. Your eyelids grow heavy, your breathing slows, and the world narrows into a calm rhythm of shadows and breath. The saint remains behind in the chapel, steady and unmoving, while you sink slowly into rest. This is how labor ends, not in noise, not in triumph, but in quiet certainty that what you made will remain. The night gathers gently, wrapping you in calm, and you surrender, body easing, mind floating. Sleep waits close, steady as stone, soft as plaster, drying in silence. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together.